First off, I collect my reference images, scenes varying in lighting, camera position, and the scenery beyond the walls. Never solely copying one image, but taking elements of each and putting them into my own render. The walls that I modeled consisted of 24 vertices. That's it. Instead of adding higher details in edit mode, I do it with modifiers. I use the bevel modifier to smooth the sharp edges. This is a non-destructive method of adding detail to your model. Simply put, non-destructive modeling methods are reversible methods of adding higher detail to your model. The quickest way to make a sequence of anything in Blender is to use the array modifier. This lets me position the walls side by side for one continuous wall. However, the walls in Attack on Titan are clearly not straight. They bend, curve, and elevate, following the terrain that they're laid on. To help with this, add in a curve. I use the Bezier curve and overlay it on the walls. Then I build a path that I want the walls to follow. Instead of having a fixed count and manually having to determine how many walls I need to fit the curve, I change the settings from fixed count to fit curve. Then, to have the walls actually follow the curve, I add in a curve modifier, select my Bezier curve. Now my walls are aligned where I want. This may seem early to some, but I'm already placing my camera. This is so that I can build the scene around this point of view. I envisioned the scene to survey the view beyond the walls, with part of the walls in view trailing off into the distance. This took a lot of tweaking to get exactly how I wanted, but by using the composition guidelines and playing around with the focal length, I managed to get something that I was happy with. Aside from a few adjustments, I do not move my camera, nor do I change any of the settings for the rest of the project. The ANT Landscape add-on is one of the easiest ways of procedurally generating landmasses in Blender. Here, I effortlessly add in all of the essential terrain to the scene. With properties affecting scale, resolution, noise, and more, there are plenty of parameters to get the scene how I want. The essence of this part was me shaping the scene with the essential landmasses, which include the main flat terrain, the hills, and the mountains in the background. I also thought that adding some water to the scene would be a nice touch, so I used the landscape add-on to add in a lake, and I place it in the bottom left-hand corner of the camera view to give the illusion that it's a continuously flowing river. I mainly use the same few PBR textures to color the terrain and the mountains. I also use this concrete texture for the walls. For the water, I use the principal BSDF node, bringing the roughness to 0 and the transmission to 1. And for some subtle waves, I use a noise texture plugged into a bump node to give the illusion that light is being reflected off of the waves in the water. I'll let you in on something. I use Blender on a laptop. And I don't even have a graphics card, so cutting corners is mandatory. I don't even model trees. I got a PNG image, duplicated it, rotated it 90 degrees, and called it done. These birds, also PNGs. And the clouds, you guessed it, volumetric base generated clouds. No, okay, also PNGs. To scatter the trees behind the mountain, I use geometry nodes based on Blender Guru's donut tutorial, also using weight painting to dictate where the trees will lie. Lighting brings a whole aesthetic to your scene. It influences the highlights, the shadows, the perception of time of day, and it heavily influences the mood, whether it feels uplifting and warm or isolated and cold. To have the most amount of freedom with my lighting, I switched the render engine from Eevee to Cycles, so that I can make use of the sky texture node in the world settings. For this scene, I preferred using a sky texture as opposed to a HDRI, as I get more freedom in the way that I want the sky to look. With this, I'm able to change the sun size, the amount of dust in the air, the ozone levels, and the altitude, all to create the scene that I want. Personally, I like sunsets. Attack on Titan is one of the best animated to evening/sunset scenes, so I wanted to recreate that by bringing the sun down, raising the dust ever so slightly, and increasing the ozone for a hint of blue tint. And these are the results. The last step is compositing, an often neglected part of the process, but for me, it's something I actively look forward to. The nodes that I use here are very simple. I use RGB curves to increase the contrast of the entire scene, as well as boost the saturation of the reds and blues. The lens distortion mode must be used sparingly, but when done right, the slight chromatic aberration gives that extra vibrancy to the render. And lastly, the combination of the ellipse mask and the blur node are there to provide a vignette effect, darkening the edges of the scene, focusing the attention on the center of the render. I combine them all with the Mix RGB node, so that when I hit render for the final time, this is what I get. Thank you for watching.